Hey guys, how's it going? It's Jay from Sony Alpha Lab, and what I got in this review is the 7artisans 35mm f1.2 lens. Now, this is an extremely fast lens, 35mm f1.2. This is a pretty quick review. I'm not going to go crazy reviewing it. It's a very basic lens. So before we get on with this lens review, below the video, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. And then, of course, if you find this video useful, please, by all means, share it with your friends. That'll really help get the video out there, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. All right, let's get on with this review. You're going to get killer background separation. This lens is optimized for the crop factor cameras like the Sony a6400, which is what I used to review this lens. But they also make it for the Canon, the Fuji X mount, and Micro Four Thirds systems. It goes for $145 US. That's really cheap. It's fully manual, of course. There's no electronics whatsoever on this lens. And you can just see how small it is. What I particularly like about it is the flaring effects you can get when shooting into the sun, but the rendering of the out of focus area is like really dreamy. It gives you like a dreamy look, and for the money, it's like a no-brainer. You know, if you don't need the autofocus, like if you have a second to focus, then this is a really, really good option in my opinion for the money. It's really well made, it's all metal, it's like a beefy design. The focus ring feels pretty good. It's not like super buttery or anything, but it does feel pretty good. And same with the aperture ring. It has a smooth aperture ring, so there's no clicking. So it's great for doing aperture throws when you're recording videos. So here's an aperture throw, f1.2, and I'm just slowly turning it. f2, f2.8, f4, 5, 6, f8, all the way to f16. So this is a really good option for video as well, in my opinion, especially if you're on a budget. B-roll footage and things like that. Some of the basic features, the effective range is 52.5mm approximately when you factor in the crop factor. It has a multi-layer lens coating which helps reduce flaring and glare and stuff like that, and it gives you a little extra punchy contrast. The filter thread on the front is 43mm, so it's pretty darn small. Minimum focus distance is 1.15 feet or approximately 35 centimeters, so you can get really close to your subject and get just incredible background separation. So the lens is made up of 6 elements in 5 groups. The lens also has a 9-blade circular aperture diaphragm, which again helps with that background out of focus rendering. It weighs in at 5.3 ounces or 150 grams. So it's got that a little bit of heft to it, but it's definitely not heavy. Alright guys, so here we are in Lightroom and we're going to go over some of the lab testing I did, and we're going to go do this fairly quickly. Notice on the top left, because this is a fully manual lens, we don't really have the aperture information. We do have the shutter speed and the ISO, but not the aperture, so you're going to have to trust that I know what aperture these are. So this one was taken at f1.2, and you can see here that it's not too bad. It's not tack sharp, and you know, it's a little bit glowy, I guess is a decent word for it. But you can see those bokeh balls in the background are very round. Overall, it's you know, just a little bit soft, I would say. But distortion control wise is really good for a lens of this price range, $145, don't forget. So let's now stop down. This one here, I believe is at f2 or f2.8. I think it's f2. And you can see it sharpened up a lot. So at f2, it got significantly sharper. It's still a little bit soft in the corners, but the center area is definitely a lot sharper. You can also see a little bit of purple fringing here on the high contrast areas. Now these images are a little bit flat, so you can go in here to the tone curve and just add a little bit of a medium contrast, and that'll punch up the colors quite a bit for you. And that's an easy way to do that if you're shooting raw quality. Now, if we stop down to F4 and we zoom in, you can see the dollar bill has gotten even sharper. And now the crayons and stuff are starting to get much sharper. The detail on the straws is really starting to come in. And if you scroll up, the corners are starting to sharpen up as well. And then if we move to f5.6, you can see the dollar bill again. It's nice and sharp. Now it's really starting to crisp up. Same thing with the bracelet and the circuit board. Corner sharpness is actually really good now at this point. And you can see the bouquet balls are starting to just octagon that little bit, but nothing crazy. Now if we go to f7.1, you can see it looks pretty much the same. The bouquet balls are still a little bit octagon, but they're getting smaller. And sharpness is really good. A lot of detail here. The string and everything is really tacked up nicely. And now we're looking at f8, and the sharpness at f8 is excellent across the board. This is the sharpest shot so far. And you can see all the way in the corners, very, very sharp. Now we're looking at f11, and f11 also looks very good. And now you can see the quarter is pretty darn sharp because the depth of field finally caught up to the scene. And here's f16, and you can see the bouquet ball still looking pretty darn good. And sharpness is still really good, even at f16 when diffraction starts to come into play. So at the minimum focus distance, which is 1.15 feet or approximately 35 centimeters, you can see the sharpness is not really that good on the quarter. And now if I go to f2.8, you can see it's starting to sharpen up a little bit, but still not really that sharp. And then if we go to f4, it's definitely starting to sharpen up quite a bit. f5.6 looks really good as well. The sharpness is really starting to come in nicely on the quarter. And then if we get to f8, you can see the sharpness on the quarter is now pretty excellent. There is still just a little bit of purple fringing here and there, but that's easily correctable in a program like Lightroom, which is what I'm using right now. This is f11, and still see very, very sharp. And then f16. And you can see the sharpness falls off a little bit on f16 compared to f11, but they are both very sharp. Alright, so now we're going to go over some real world photos. And again, I don't really know what the aperture was on every one of these images, but I can tell you I pretty much shot wide open on this lens most of the time, and that means f1.2. I did stop it down on a few shots that I know for sure. I was at like f2, f2.8, f4 even, and I will let you know which ones are which. But for the most part, I was shooting wide open because it's an f1.2 lens and I just wanted to exploit that depth of field as much as possible. My boy Jace was at Taekwondo. He did a board break, so he was super excited. He was enjoying his lollipop. And I took this cool hold the lollipop out type photo. I love the depth of field rendering that this lens produces, and here's a perfect example of it. It just has like a look, and here he is in his fighting stance. Here's another angle, and I have a video on how to manual focus with the Sony a6400 and Sony cameras in general. If you don't know how to do it, it's a lot easier than you might think using the tools that are built into the camera. Now here was just a shot I took in the studio of my delicious BLT sandwich, and you can see the background bouquet balls are just phenomenal. And I did stop it down to f2 for this particular photo. And here's another one at f2. Now this one I took wide open, but again, the 3D pop that a lens like this offers is phenomenal. Now here's one of Jace. I actually did edit this photo, and I just wanted to zoom in here to show you. This is wide open at f1.2, and you can see it's sharp enough. For a shot like this is acceptably sharp. It's definitely not as sharp as $1,500 lens is, but for $145, just look at this. Now here's another one of Jace, and you can just see how the background bouquet balls of these illuminated trees really make an awesome background for a portrait, in my opinion. And I was very happy with the results of these shots. And now here's one which just had some dewdrops on top of this fence type thing. So you can see the depth of field and the way that those bouquet balls render, and that out of focus area is just absolutely awesome. Now here's just a snapshot of a leaf, fall foliage time of year, you know, and here's just a mossy tree. Now shooting into the sun, you get a very interesting flare effect from this lens. It actually like puts out like this weird, I don't even know what to call it. It's like a rainbow, like bleeding flare. And I thought it was cool. I mean, this is great. If you want to take portraits of somebody and throw the sun in the background, you're going to get these awesome flaring results. and they make for very interesting photos, especially when it comes to those trendy type portraits and stuff. Now, here was just a really cool butterfly. Its wings were a little bit jacked up, but I thought it looked really pretty nonetheless, and you can see how the flowers in the background render. And I shot all these files in raw quality, and I did add a little bit of contrast in Lightroom, just to let you know. I used a tone curve to add a little contrast. And just look at this. It almost looks like they're glowing or something, the way these leaves look. It's like a glow effect. It's really remarkable the way this lens renders. Now, I used this lens to take a couple of photos of the Sony RX100 Mark VII, which I recently reviewed. Be sure to check that review out. It's up on my YouTube channel right now. It'll be on the website shortly at the time of this recording. But just take a look at that background, and then now look at it at f1.2. You see, it just butters out. I mean, that's incredible. So this is f8 versus f1.2 approximately. I'm pretty sure that's what I had it set to. And now look at this shot, looking into the sun. You see how it made this cool flare effect, making the camera look like dreamy or something? This is like, just all I did was add a little contrast in Lightroom, and this is what it produced. I mean, it's like a magical type, I wouldn't say magical, but it's definitely like a unique rendering that I've never experienced with a lens before. So I was extremely happy and just had a lot of fun using this lens. Here's a couple landscape shots. I stopped her down to about 5.6 on this image, and you can see the sharpness and detail is very good across the board. Very happy with this result. Here's one that was more at like f2.8 or so, I think I had this at, and I was really happy with this image as well. Has a nice cool 3D pop type effect. And here's another one. I had it opened up to like f2 on this one, so the foreground is out of focus, and I focused like right around in the middle of the image or so. I took a couple of photos when I went to this place called Equilibrium, and just a couple of snapshots here. These are straight off the camera, untouched. And here's what I ended up leaving with. Now, this photo I did enhance a little bit. I added some contrast and cropped it a bit. And again, some really nice 3D pop offered by this lens. Now here I went over to Holy Dog, this restaurant on the right. They have unbelievable hot dog type food there. And here's just an image of the streets of Middletown while I was on my way to Holy Dog. Now here's what I ended up getting. It's called the Girlfriend's Treatment, is the name of this particular sausage, and it was absolutely phenomenal. It was one of the best tasting things I've ever eaten, to be honest with you. It was incredible. Now here's a picture of one of those beers that I just showed you in the can in this glass, and with the background out of focus balls. I put it on a piece of glass, and I actually put a light underneath the glass and illuminated it from the bottom, which creates this glowing effect on the beer, and it just came out phenomenal. Again, with this lens, I stopped her down at f2 for these shots. Now look at this one. Really, really impressed with these results, and I cropped them in a square so I can share them on Instagram. Now I went down to the Green Bridge. If you're familiar with my reviews, you might remember that bridge from some of the other reviews that I did. But just look at the detail. And I did stop it down to about f2.8, I believe, on this shot. And then looking at the spider web, you can see the detail is very, very good. I had it stopped down a little bit on this one as well, about f2.8. And looking at the depth of field fall off here, here's another one of just a bolt. And now here is one shot wide open at f1.2. Now here's one at about f4, same exact spot. And then here's one at f16. So you can see the different depth of fields you can get. Now here's just a picture of a lock, high contrast lock. And then here's a picture focused behind the lock down at the river, just so you can see how that renders when you're shooting through a fence like this. I actually stuck the camera inside one of the beams of the bridge and aimed it upward to get this pretty interesting perspective type shot. I was happy with that. Now here's looking off the bridge. This just looks awesome. This came out really good. I edited it a little bit in Lightroom, just tweaked the colors a tad, added a little contrast. Really happy with the result. Now here's one looking down at that bolt that I showed you earlier. This bolt here. Just looking down at it, you can get a shot like this, and it looks pretty darn cool, nice and 3D. And I had a little bit of contrast to that image. And here's another one. I was at my brother's house. We chopped some trees down, and after the work was done, my brother broke out a couple of frosty beverages, and I took a few shots. These are wide open, f1.2, and they came out fantastic in my opinion. That background rendering is just killer. And here's one of my dad. He was there to help. He loves cutting down trees. My brother had some dead trees that were about to fall on his shed, so we had to cut them down. Here's my good friend Brian, and he was playing with my brother's dog, giving him some pets. And you can see I focused on the dog, and look at how out of focus Brian is. And he's literally only a foot behind the dog. That's what kind of depth of field we're talking with here. It's super, super narrow. Now this one I focused on Brian, and you can see the dog is out of focus because that depth of field is just so narrow. And here's a couple bottle caps, just some basic landscape shots. We went out to lunch. I took these out of the car window. We were going about 50 miles an hour, and they came out great. And we were down in Warwick where we went to get some lunch, and there's this incredible candy store. So Brian is like, dude, you got to check this candy store out. So we walked over, and then we went inside, and they just have crazy cool decorations in this store and like tons of candy. It's like old school candy store. Here's just a shot of my brother and Brian outside the restaurant we were waiting to go in. And here's just a picture of the street looking up as we were waiting. And then we finally sat down at the restaurant, and it had a cool reflection on the table. So I took this silhouette type shot. I thought it came out pretty cool. And then we got an appetizer. They were called short rib tacos. And I mean, unbelievable how good these were. Absolutely phenomenal. The best tacos I've ever had in my life. We went to this place called Eddie's Roadhouse. If you're ever in Warwick, New York, you have to go to Eddie's Roadhouse. I've never had food there that wasn't absolutely unbelievable. And here's another angle. So this lens is great for food photography. Just check this out. These are all wide open. Now you could argue that the depth of field is too thin. You know, you really want more of the food sharp, but I like shots like this, so you know, whatever. This was called steak Fritz. My dad got that. It's just basically sliced up delicious steak on top of fries with gorgonzola sauce. It was unbelievable. This is what my plate looked like after I ate it like an absolute savage animal. And here's a cool picture of me, I thought, when I walked over to my car to put the camera away. The reflection on the window I thought was pretty cool, so I took a shot, and there I am, smiling. So, all right, let's finish up this review. So at the end of the day, guys, I highly recommend the 7artisans photoelectric 35mm f1.2 lens. For the money, $145, you really can't beat what you're getting, in my opinion. It's an incredible value for the dollar if you need a fast lens and you don't require autofocus. If you have the second to focus manually, then this is a really good option worth considering. And if you're somebody on a budget that wants that killer background separation, you want a cool flaring effect for your video footage, for example, but you're on a budget, well, I would really consider looking at this lens. It's an excellent option in my opinion. Corner sharpness isn't the greatest and so forth, but for $145 and that fast speed, you really do get something that produces like borderline like magical results. It really has its own look to it, and I hope that it was illustrated in the sample photos and the lab testing. I hope you got something out of this review, and that is pretty much it for the 7artisans 35mm f1.2 lens review. So if you have any questions, comments, please be sure to leave them below the video, and I'll be happy to help. I'll be happy to answer. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think of this lens. $145, like, what do you think? All right, guys, I will catch up with you next time. Have a great day.